From Boca Raton, Florida, this is Behind the Bima. On this episode, Rabbi Goldberg and co-hosts Rabbi Josh Broide and Rabbi Philip Moskowitz are joined by Dr. Erica Brown, a leading Jewish educator and author. Recognized for her profound insight into the Jewish experience and spiritual growth, Dr. Brown discusses transformation and the importance of introspection as we approach the high holidays. Dr. Brown shares her thoughts on the challenges of modern leadership, the role of love in spiritual practice, and the significance of a deep connection to Israel. Plus, reflecting on the legacy of Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks and the necessity of fostering a sense of responsibility towards the Jewish community and the world. All this and more, Behind the Bima.
Welcome back Behind the Bima. Rabbi Efrem Goldberg, joined by my dear friends, Rabbi Philip Moskowitz and Rabbi Josh Broide. So glad, grateful to be back together again, officially signifying the end of the summer. It's a funny summer because on the one hand, it still feels like, the first of Elul has not started. It's just the beginning of Elul happening now. It was just the end of August, really transitioning to September. And yet, school's back in session, people are back, vacations are over. So it's a funny end. But the real signal, vacation is over, summer's over, is we are back together again. And we've got an incredible lineup and year of Behind the Bima waiting for everyone. But first, it was a very difficult, very tragic week for the Jewish people. All of us made Havdalah on Motzei Shabbos on Saturday night to discover first the rumors, and then the information began to come out about the 6 hostages who were found, and just devastating because we were all davening and waiting for it to go a very different direction. To hear, as we had on another Shabbos, Motzei Shabbos, of a rescue, of incredible, miraculous rescue, and they were so close, right there, and yet Hashem determined it would be a different outcome. And we joined the Jewish people in mourning and grieving and feeling the unbearable pain, mixed with a lot of anger at the world, the international community, Hamas, so many who don't get it, the media, and just a lot of pain. So I don't know how the two of you felt when you heard and are processing that.
I think for me, obviously there's the tragedy, and this one felt different. Obviously there have been tragedies over the last 10 months. This one felt different for the Jewish people. You just saw everyone walking around almost like in a funk and in a daze, like no one really knew how to process. But, for me, one of the most outrageous parts is just the way the media has been covering it. And it's so frustrating that at a time when this should be about Jewish unity, at a time, and I'm not judging anybody in the way they're reacting. And I get all of the anger and I get the politics in Israel. I'm not naive about any of that. But the fact that the international media has chosen to highlight that part, almost to the exclusion of every other part of it, is deeply frustrating for me. And it's not the face that this should be having. This is about human beings. It's about people. It's about families. It's about tragedy. It's about sons and daughters that are never coming home. And the fact that every article is about Netanyahu and the protests and that to me is just, it's very, very frustrating that that's what they've chosen to focus on, to the exclusion of the deep, deep tragedy that's involved here.
Yeah.
I remember I didn't see it at night. I only saw it when I got to shul the next morning. We started talking about it, and I think I was trying to figure out, because maybe it didn't register who it was. I just heard that there were 6 people, 6 hostages, and obviously Hirsch would rise to the top just in terms of his popularity and his American, and the other ones I just didn't know their names. But I asked you, and I said, well, what makes this one different? Why is everyone reacting so differently with this event as opposed to all the others? And I remember you were just trying to explain that to me, because I just didn't. I didn't understand it. I didn't understand that this was, they were alive, and now just recently, very as early as
it's barbaric.
Right.
They were executed. They were
Right.
Innocent people were shot in the back of their head. They were executed, and the international community should be outraged at Hamas, and instead that outrage is pointing elsewhere. And I agree, it is deeply frustrating. And I'll say that I think that in Israel they felt that they live we're in a certain bubble in America, and they're 100% right. There's a sea that divides us, and as much as we love and visit and care and are concerned and have raised money and daven from the bottom of our hearts, but we can't understand their experience. But I would say when it comes to this, to a certain degree, they're in a bubble that don't understand our experience, which is, in America, we're fighting for the Jewish people's lives. We're fighting for public opinion. We're fighting for politicians and people in power. We're fighting for the truth and for them to understand. And, in that bubble of Israel and of course, who are we? We're not judging whatsoever. There are people who feel incredibly strongly about politicians, about the current structured government, about who is to blame, about what could be done differently. These protests, even the framing of bring them home rather than let them go, bring them home puts all the burden on Israel when they're not the ones who started a war or are holding hostages. And we all know that if Hamas return the hostages and put down their weapons, this war is over. That moment, that minute. And so, maybe in Israel, what seemed like protests or a labor strike or shutting down an airport or all these things are trying to push their government, but it makes our job harder to try to say that Israel is the victim and Hamas are the perpetrator, and there's only one side, to blame. This could have been over, and Israel's agreed several times to several versions of a ceasefire. Hamas didn't, and I'll just say this in closing this part, that we saw Rachel Poland Goldberg apologize at Hirsch's funeral for not bringing him home. We saw President Herzog apologize, and we even saw Prime Minister Netanyahu at his press conference apologize. But nobody in the U.S. administration has apologized for not bringing an American citizen home, for not putting the pressure on Qatar, for not putting the pressure on Iran, for not demanding, for not passing legislation, for not withholding funds and support, for not enacting sanctions, for not putting the kind of pressure that might have suffocating pressure that might have forced them to release these hostages. And not only is there no apology, but one vice presidential candidate couldn't even respond. Just turned to talk more about his barbecue at his fair, and so that's absent. Israel. Do Israel owe apologies to these hostages? Maybe it's not for us to weigh in, but I could say the international community, the international world owes an apology to Israel for leaving them out to dry, for pressuring not to go into Rafah earlier, for holding back weapons, and all those apologies and all that accountability is missing from these conversations. And so, in addition, or compounding the grief and pain of the loss of these precious 6 lives, is that continued or increased feeling of isolation and loneliness, and a world that's so backwards and upside down and confused, and a yearning to be united and not divided. And the more that we're divided, the bigger the victory we're handing our enemy. Sinwar and Hamas could not want anything more than to have executed 6 hostages and watch us fight about who's to blame for it. So it's incredibly painful time, incredibly difficult time to be a Jew, no question about it. But it's also a big time. It's Elul. It's the beginning of something new. So Rabbi Broide, you've mentioned what you're doing for Elul. How's your streak going on the Kola Boker? How's the 5 a.m. man? How's the 5 a.m. man doing?
Let me just tell you something. I noticed last week you extended the time. I think it goes till 7:45 now.
Yeah, 2 slots,
Right.
6:15 to 7, 7:45.
Right.
Take
I'm
the
just
whole
telling
thing.
you,
Part of
you
it.
might be adding a 3rd slot now, because I might have been there a little earlier today, and there are a lot of guys. There must have been 5 guys, or let's just say seated and learning at 5:30 already. So I don't know
Wow.
why there's no 3rd. It should be the 1st slot. It should be first slot is 5:30. So
There are people there in the 5s. In the
in the
5s is already
fives,
like
they're in
next
the
level.
we are, and there might have been something else I might have tried this morning. I'm not going to get into it, but we'll see. I want to see how this goes before presenting the option.
Understood. Now the 5 a.m. wake up. How is the going to sleep earlier? How is rescheduling your internal clock been going?
The challenge is that someone might have been trying to call me around 9:30 last night, but I think I was out. I was long gone, and
Yeah.
you need to. You can't do it on both ends. And again, some people might be night people. That's great. Study and do your thing at night. But for those of us that just you're just going to waste the time anyway. So try to get up a little earlier.
Now I will say, everyone always says like, "Oh, Elul's late this year, Elul's early this year." Obviously, Elul comes out at the same time. We're on a lunar calendar, but from the Gregorian perspective, Elul is late this year. And I don't know about you guys, but I notice a huge difference when Elul comes when we're already in September versus some years Elul will come August 4th, August 5th. And by the time people get home from the summer vacations, you're already at Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur.
Right.
There is a huge advantage this year that
Yeah.
kids are back in school, people are back in their schedules, summer vacations are over. And now you really have a month to be able to prepare. I mean, when it comes out Labor Day weekend, Rosh Hashanah,
Right.
you're just like getting your bearings. You have like a week to scrounge something together by the time you get back from vacation and the kids get back to school. This is a huge opportunity because you have that entire full month of September to be able to be engrossed in Elul.
So what are you doing, Rabbi Moskowitz? Tell us, what's your Elul plan? Any Kabbalah, any personal goal, any change you're making?
Well, it's interesting. I read, obviously, I'm sure all of you read over the summer as well. So I read a number of books over the summer, and all of them circled around the same idea, which I'm really trying to work on for personal reasons why it's been a challenge for me, but really being present in conversations. All the books I read have lamented the breakdown in communication, the breakdown of our ability to speak to each other, but really speak to each other. In other words, to be present in a conversation, to be able to engage the person, we've spoken about, whether it's at the counter at the supermarket or a security guard or a custodian or someone at a checkout counter or someone at an airport, and to really be able to be present with that person for even just a few moments and to make them feel seen. And that's a term that I'm seeing a lot in a lot of these books that I'm reading, is just this invisibility of people and the destruction, the erosion that's causing in society. So for me personally, and again, why this is a challenge for me, we could discuss another time, but to really work on being present. Now that doesn't mean every conversation, because you can't be present every conversation. You and I are running from drusha to drusha on a Shabbos morning. It's impossible in a hallway to see everybody and to say hi. You're in a rush. But to choose a few specific interactions every single day, to really be present in that interaction and to work on that for a variety of reasons and on different levels is something I'm definitely working on.
We got a front row seat to that because we grabbed something to eat the other day, the three of us and Jeffrey. And when the waiter came over, we watched you say, "What's your name?" And then you had a whole conversation with Anthony and Araceli, who was clearing the table. And we got a front row seat to watching you learn a name and try to interact and try to be present in that moment. And I think it had an impact. I mean, watching the way that, I don't know how many people ask or bother asking how their day is going or what their name is. And it wasn't because when you do that with the TSA agent, you're trying to, you do that with the person who's weighing your bag at the airport. You want to make sure, even though you're a couple pounds overweight. So maybe one could be accused of a alternate agenda. But it was a beautiful thing to see, that front row seat. I'm proud to tell you that my ice bath is set up, the ice pod. A little bit nervous to report on it because now you go public. You gotta keep it up. I will just say, it's fantastic. It's cold. It's cold. I listen to podcasts. I don't ever listen to Andrew Huberman or some of the others who are real research-based scientists, professors, talking about best healthy living, how to get sunlight first thing in the morning, and when to schedule your coffee. First of all, it's interesting that much of their advice aligns with what we do, which is first thing in the morning, challenge your mind and study. We got our Kola Boker. People go to the daf. Meditation, we got our davening. If you're doing it properly, you're losing yourself in meditation. Gratitude, one of the things, this amazing conversation what you're about to hear with Dr. Erica Brown, she talks about before Modim, thinking of three things. So every day when you daven, Modim is the chance to have a gratitude journal, think about three things. So what all the experts recommend, the Jewish people have been doing forever, which leads me to believe that some of our holiest people who went to the mikvah, no matter what the circumstance or weather. I read the article book on the Ribnitzer Rebbe, the great Ribnitzer. We've been to his grave together outside of Muncie. And the Ribnitzer famously went, broke open ice to go to the mikvah, and certainly did it for the spiritual impact of the mikvah. But the fact that it also brought an alertness and an awakening, and was good for inflammation and good for circulation and good for processing glucose,
freezing,
and all the other sleeping well later, all the other benefits. So it happens to be all my kids.
Now here's would you admit if it did not have that impact? In other words, would you be man enough to admit, I tried it and it was nice, it was fun, but it's a bunch of hot air?
I'll tell you the truth. I got it. The first time I tried it was I had to set it up. I had to get it right. I had to get the temperature in, and I had to get it all going. And the first time I did it was, I think it was Erev Shabbos. I did it for a little while. And, it was good. It wakes you up. First of all, you can't breathe. When you first go in, you start hyperventilating, and I thought I couldn't breathe. They all tell you this, and you got to breathe your way through the first minute. And after that, you start to adjust. And at no point are you like, this is comfortable. I love this. I don't ever want to leave. You never feel that. But you're like, I got this. I could stay here. And it was great in that, when you came out, there's a pride that you conquered your inclination. You did something that was a challenge. There's certainly an alertness. I mean, you go into freezing cold water, you're going to be alert, but I didn't feel it. But then I started doing a quick dip in the ice bath in the morning before Kola Boker. It wakes you up, your circulation system. You're like, it gets you going. The science of it apparently is you're putting your body in a condition that it thinks it's going to die. So it goes into fight or flight mode, and it releases adrenaline, endorphins. It does all this stuff because you're immersed in freezing water. You're not supposed to be there for a long period.
I'm going to enjoy talking to people while you enjoy destroying your body.
You should make a phone call and talk to somebody while you're in the ice bath. Be the
I
best
should.
of both worlds.
Is your
Yeah.
head submerged most of the time, or just
No, you do a quick dip of the head, just to get under a little bit. There's actually some science about that, about, at the beginning, at the end, when you get your head wet. So I want to just am I going to do this every day for the rest of my life? We'll see. It's possible I've been known to get excited about things, go through a fad, go through a phase. Possible.
right?
So, I did throw out the boxes. After the first
That's a
second I
big
was
step,
in,
by the way.
Burn the boxes.
when I first got in, I was like, "Don't throw the boxes out." I'm
Don't
sending
throw
them back. It was so cold, I couldn't believe it. But now, done it a bunch of times, and I'm like, I throw out the boxes. I'm in it. I'm keeping it. I'm
But
in
see,
it.
you've ruined it for me, because for a long time, and I listen to the same podcast, and Tony Robbins talks about it, and and I was dabbling with the idea, but now that you do it, so I can't do. I'm like, I can't do it anymore. I got to find
your
something
thing.
else,
No,
because
you
I'm that
do it.
competitive with Rabbi Goldberg that I'll never admit that I did the same thing that he did.
Do it. You
No,
do
what
it.
do you mean? You just do it colder. He does it at 50 degrees. You do it at 30 degrees.
But at 58, so you'll say 58, that's not cold. I
No,
heard you're supposed to
freezing.
do it at 30,
Freezing.
at 39. First of all, if you look into it, you'll see that somewhere between 50 and 60 degrees. It depends if you're doing it for muscle recovery or the other benefits. And I'll just tell you this, tough guys, if you think 58 ain't cold, I'd like to immerse you in some 58-degree water.
Exactly.
You will not be able to breathe at first. You can't breathe.
Right.
I
You
did
fight
57
hyperventilating.
degrees last night.
That's funny because I did 42 this
Yeah,
morning.
exactly.
Anyway, but that's not. There are other Kabbalahs for Elul. That's not the main Kabbalah. There are other Kabbalahs for Elul, but I'll tell you that what's nice about it. One of the people who talks about doesn't use the term Yetzer Hara, doesn't know the term Yetzer Hara, but right when you're standing next to it, you're like, you know what? Maybe I did it yesterday. I'll do it tomorrow. I don't know if I need it. I don't really have time for it. And you've got to, in a split second, decide, no, be quiet. I own you. You don't own me. You're not going to tell me what to do. I'm going to show you who's boss. And you get in that thing and you crouch down and you say, no. I'm not just jumping up and getting out. Whatever I decide, I'm doing 3 minutes, I'm doing 5 minutes, I'm doing 15 minutes, I'm staying. And it's a win. It's a win. I think you feel that way when you make it to Kol Boker. You feel that way when you came to shul and you could have davened at home, or you slept in, you went to the early minyan, or you wanted to share gossip and you held back, or you were too tired to ask the server their name, but you did anyway. Every time you have that win, it just leads to more wins. It gains some
That's the making
momentum.
bed in the morning. That was that famous speech where he said, first
Yeah.
thing in the morning, he said, you want to be successful today, you make your bed, because that's the win you need right when you wake up.
Yeah. So someone who teaches us a lot about how to win is Dr. Erica Brown. She's been coming to our community for many years. Perhaps Rabbi Moskowitz knows her for the longest, as she might have been his babysitter at one point in his life. But she's now babysitting the Jewish people and babysitting the Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks-Herenstein Center for Values and Leadership at Yeshiva University. An accomplished scholar, author, Torah teacher, has so much to say. There was so much wisdom in this conversation that could have gone on for many, many more hours. We're excited and proud to bring that conversation to you. Without any further ado, Dr. Erica Brown. We are so grateful for the opportunity to go behind the Bima with Dr. Erica Brown. Dr. Brown is no stranger to our community. One of the highlights, certainly of recent years, and I'm sure of this year as well, will be your visit to our community. Dr. Brown, you're like a rock star when you come, and the shul is packed. Not a lot of people could pack a shul on a Motzei Shabbos on a Saturday night, but it's hard to get a seat. And we're grateful to you for coming each year, and grateful to allow us to go behind the Bima together.
Thank you. It's a delight and really a privilege to be with the three of you.
So let's start with, we're heading into Elul, and we are in this month of being prepared for change and transformation and working on ourselves. And that's something you've written and spoken and study and speak about. What are some of the key things as you go into Elul, as you go into this time of year where maybe in a yeshiva traditional setting, some have for a long time tried to promote that the word Elul itself, the name of that month, should instill fear and trembling and awe. But many today might say that those may not be the most healthy feelings or the biggest motivators towards change. So when you enter this time of year, where does your head and where do your heart go? What do you think about? What are you working on? What are better words, or what are better mottos, or what are better themes for a person to be thinking about to get into the best spaces? We're counting up to these days of awe that don't have to be awful, but can be awe-inspiring for us.
How long do you have? I think this Elul is categorically different than any Elul in my lifetime. So I think we need to start there. And as a result, because of all of the events since October 7th and since October 7th, I think where normally I go into this time period and do a spiritual inventory of myself, I feel that that my attachment to Israel, my attachment to the Jewish people, my attachment to the situation has really, I would say, very much shaped the contours of my thinking about tshuva and what it means to return to a deep Israel consciousness. I think I see it among our students at Yeshiva University, students who are staying longer in Israel, students who are going back and volunteering in Israel, making aliyah. There's this sense that sometimes we're alone with ourselves, and sometimes we're alone with our people in the world. And what needs repair are essential and basic relationships. I think one of them is the stock taking around our relationship to Israel. Are we visiting? Are we making a commitment? Where does our tzedakah, our charity, go? How much are we thinking about our Israeli friends? How often do we contact them? I often mention this. How often are you calling Israel to see how your friends are doing? And people are like, I keep meaning to do it. So you don't have to mean to do it. Tshuva is actually saying, I'm doing it. And I'm not talking about doing it. I'm actually doing it. So I think for me, this season of Ella, I'll say, you mentioned awe and fear, but you didn't mention love, right? Ani l'dodi v'dodi li. And I think the challenge is to feel not only that we love ourselves and that we love HaKadosh Baruch Hu and that we love the Jewish people, but also to feel that we love the world. I think it's very hard to try to heal a world that you feel revulsion towards. And I
When you
think a
say the
lot.
world, could you just clarify? The world means the people of the world, the geopolitics of the world, the earth and environment and globe of the world. What do you mean by the world?
Yes, yes, and yes. I guess for me, part of this, I've been, profoundly influenced by my teacher and mentor, Rabbi Sacks, who I'm so honored to represent at YU's Sacks-Herenstein Center in his honor and his name and his teachings. And Rabbi Sacks wrote a book to heal a fractured world, and he didn't write that book and say this only applies when everything is going well. If anything, when you feel that the world is betraying you, it's so easy to withdraw. And for me, when I think of Ani l'dodi v'dodi li, I think about what it means to expand the concentric circles of love and not to retreat from the world, because the world is so broken now. Now is when we really need to do the work. And I think Jews who have been raised on a tikkun olam only diet have don't really know what to do with their Judaism right now. They feel, where is this world that I loved and I gave to your causes and I didn't give to my own causes. I didn't work up for my own causes. I don't understand my own identity, and now I'm confused and I have no belonging. So I think for me, another charge this year is, what is my responsibility to Jews who are not like me, who don't observe their Judaism or didn't think about their Judaism the way that I think about mine, and who feel confused and alone and don't really know where to put their energies right now. This is an amazing time for people who care about outreach to do the outreach. And unfortunately, in the modern Orthodox community, the centrist Orthodox community, we care a lot about things, but non-observant Jews, for the most part, aren't on the agenda. And I think that might be a good goal for us.
Rabbi Broide, I see you're jumping through the screen for that to follow up on that.
The first interview in 4 or 5 years that I'm actually taking notes on something that one of the guests is saying, because it's just so profound and it's great. So thank you so much, Doctor. We're fortunate to have started a program in our shul here that has a licensed partnership with the one and only Sacks Legacy Trust, and we are so fortunate to have this Partners in Jewish Life program. I was presenting it to someone earlier this morning. Not someone from our shul, certainly not someone from the formal Jewish community, someone who is that person you're talking about that's on the outside. And I was trying to explain to this individual, to this guy, who Rabbi Sacks was. And I'm like, you don't understand. If we didn't have this partnership, be able to teach his material, there's no close second. There are a lot of great rabbis out there and great
Right.
leaders, but he was so unique. And if it's not him, it was no one. He's like, well, tell me what's so great about him. I'm like, I don't know. Let's watch his TED talk and you'll see. But how do you describe to someone what made Rabbi Sacks so unique? And are we going to see more of that? Is there more Rabbi Sacks coming that are going to be those future leaders for communities?
Oh, I hope so. I do think that his absence is most profoundly felt right now, because I think we want to hear what would you say? How would you give us hope to carry us across this situation? I'm very heartwarmed that that actually this is going to be the 20th anniversary of A Letter in the Scroll, and a chapter of that book was translated into Hebrew, and it was given to Chayalim. It was given to thousands and thousands of soldiers. So in that way, his rising popularity in Israel has and throughout the world has actually meant that some of the messaging that he couldn't give in person is being given in print. And I do want to say, since I did a podcast over the 9 days using his voice and putting his voice in, there was nothing like Rabbi Sacks's voice. I always say it was the spires of Cambridge came into the classroom, and there's something about his worldliness, his humility, his cosmopolitan understanding of the world, his outreach to figures of faith, and caring about the fabric of faith in society. Now, it wasn't, he was writing books not only for the Orthodox community, for people who already cared, he was writing books for society to care. Some of the books, like there are works that he's written. The Home We Build Together was a book that about multiculturalism in Britain and the failure of multiculturalism in Britain, and trying to say, if we want to create a loving society, we can't treat immigrants as if they're in our guest house. It's nice to have you, but you're leaving. It's a house that we build together, and I think that that image of the home we build together is profound. Will there be another, Rabbi Sacks? I would like to think so. YU, we have two graduate programs and undergraduate programs where we have students from all of our graduate schools who study together, Jewish and non-Jewish, who not only learn and inspired by him, but are involved in serious social justice programming, helping asylum seekers and their families, working on AI to help in cancer detection. It was programs that I think Rabbi Sacks had this broad vision. I will say, one thing that makes me afraid is we've become an increasingly parochial community, and instrumental in our understanding of higher education. Let's do business. Let's just get through school. Let's get the degree. Let's get out and and get out of the liberal arts. And Rabbi Sacks was a philosopher. He was trained to be a philosopher, to think about large problems and to also bring the best of Western thought to them. And unless we instill in the next generation of young people. And by the way, I'm not only talking about Jews. If you read the profile about the humanities in the New Yorker some months ago, maybe it was even a year ago now, the decline of humanities students in higher education generally, I think we have a problem. We have in our Orthodox community. So proud that our Jewish students know so much about Torah. But about the world and the willingness to see the world and travel the world within, and travel through the minds of great classical thinkers, I think less so. I think we haven't been promoting that. We've been trying to replace ourselves materially.
Do you see, I just want to follow up, and then Rabbi Moskowitz will jump in. But do you see any correlation between, as culture of the world or knowledge of intellectual thinking in the world has become so distorted and dumbed down and broadened to things that are the opposite? We've exchanged culture for pop culture, and we've exchanged all these things that might explain some of the retreat, even within the Torah world or the Jewish world, the centrist world, whatever you want to call it, to say, if that's what the world is offering and that's what it's become now. You speak to young people who are on not Yeshiva University, but on secular college campuses, they could be majoring in reality TV. They're majoring in gender. They're majoring in things that we don't consider cultural, intellectual. We don't consider necessarily of positive value. And so as those definitions have become so loosened and distorted and corrupted, maybe that explains some of the retreat, because of the fear of, how do you know what you're going to encounter that's genuine, that's consistent with the Torah, that's outside of it? Rabbi Sacks certainly was able to both engage it and promote it authentically, but for the young person today, they might feel threatened by that.
I hear you. I think that we talk about things like that, but I think that's really on the margins of the academic community. Those margins are very loud. Right now the intersectionality of, and the binary approach to who's oppressed and all who are oppressed, except some who are oppressed, don't get the voice. I hear you, and I want to acknowledge that, but I don't think that explains the whole story. I think that we have an enormous number of material pressures that are put on our young people. Someone described it as the cycle, right? I went to high school so that I could go to college, so that I could go to graduate school, so I could get a degree, so I could do the same thing that my parents did. And what I don't hear there is, I feel a responsibility towards the world, not towards a 3-car garage. I am going to make sacrifices for the world. I'm concerned about who is going into the rabbinate, who is going to education, not only Jewish education. We have a national teacher crisis. So I think that it's fair to say that the things that we study, right, that you can take a class in golf and also in Breaking Bad, the series at University of Maryland. I don't believe that we offer either of those at Yeshiva University. I still think that basic requirements remain relatively similar. So I think that there's more that needs to be unearthed there in this equation.
First of all, Rabbi Broide would be happy to teach a class on Breaking Bad if he'd like. I'm sure he'd volunteer himself.
I have never seen it, so I'm involved in the I try to make the bed whole, and if it's broken, try to fix it.
Philosophy.
We've been talking about leadership a lot, and you just referenced the national teacher crisis. You mentioned Rabbi Sacks and the leadership that he played. You mentioned rabbis and training a next generation of rabbis. I once heard you say a line which had a profound impact on me. He said, it's no wonder that nobody goes into leadership because the rest of us are terrible followers. And I thought there was a lot of wisdom in that, which is that we're always training rabbis, we're training teachers, we're training leaders. We have, entrepreneurial courses, we have leadership seminars, but do we train people to be followers? Can you explain what you meant by that? And do you still believe it to be true? And what's the answer to that?
Yeah, I'm trying to see if I have the book, The Courageous Followers, behind me. For all the leadership books, I've only found one book about fellowship. And I'm not sure I said terrible followers. I might have used a different adjective, but just to defend myself, I think we're challenging followers. And what I mean by that is when your Shabbat table conversation is about the rabbi's sermon and not in a positive way, when it is about your terrible teacher, your terrible school, the problems that you have, the head of school, the principal, your children say, why would I want that for myself? Why would I want that for myself? We have many, unfortunately, every year we have, a certain number of school positions open that go unfilled, even when the salary is quite high. And I think people they want to be servants of the community in the best possible way. They don't want to be exploited by a community. They don't want their family to experience that. And that's incumbent upon all of us. Each and every one of us has to use a different kind of language if we think at all about the Jewish future. For someone who is hurt, because now we use social media, right? I've even seen this in rabbinic searches where people use social media to promote a particular candidate and not think for 1 second what that is doing to someone else's family. So I think that there's a way in which we're becoming a little bit warped. We focus a lot on personality and one aspect of a personality and things that don't work. I struggle with this myself in the Jewish institution. I've always worked for the Jewish community for the past, now will be 37 years. And virtually every institution that I've worked with on some level has been a punching bag for someone else. And the positives of that institution, whatever it may be, have been unbelievable and inspiring. And then one thing goes wrong. You had that piece of kugel and it was off. And you're still talking about it. And I belittle it, but it's really true. And I think we have to think about the kind of gratitude. I want to share a story with you, Rabbi Phil, from our Boston days. I want to share a story with you. I was once teaching a Wexner class in Metro West, a wonderful class, and I gave everyone, we were talking about the synagogues and evolving nature of synagogues and their culture, and I asked if anyone had ever written a thank you note to their rabbi. And everyone looks down. You know, that teacher, when they're in the classroom, they all look down because they are afraid. And I gave them an assignment. Just write a letter. It could be an email. I like I like a thank you note myself, but okay, you write it. You'll write an email. And so the next week I asked to report back, and Bill said, I'm really ashamed. I'm ashamed that I have not written up to this point, because I wrote that email to my rabbi, and within minutes he responded. He told me that he cried. This is a man who maybe even married him, had been at the circumcision of his boys, had bar mitzvahed his boys, had officiated at their weddings. It didn't dawn on him to ever say, this is what you've meant to my family, and how you've carried us through these milestone events. So I say this, and if you've heard me speak publicly, I will often say this about teachers who influence you. You think to yourself, do you want to walk through the world with a scarcity mentality or an abundance mentality? And when you think about Elul and Tshuva, to say to yourself, when I walk down the street, do I say good morning to people and expect a good morning? Or do I think, I don't know who you are? I watch people in elevators. I watch students in elevators. Stop looking down, look up. Does it hurt you to say good morning? We need affirmations, especially from strangers, that the world is still a good and loving place. So back to the Elul, Ani l'Dodi v'Dodi li, and loving the world again. How do the little interactions that I have, especially with strangers, especially in places like synagogues and other places where we need people to be friendly, we need community. Are you making your contribution every single day, maybe even every single hour, to building a more loving society?
Just to go behind the bima, like rabbi-wise, a little bit, I will tell you, and I hope I won't regret saying this publicly, but there are people who get a rabbi a gift for being Masada Kedushin, right? So sometimes there's a very nice check, sometimes there's a physical gift, and I always say, more meaningful is the note, is just an acknowledgement. Is just, I know it took time, I know those preparations, sometimes I know you traveled, I know you filled out complicated documents, I know you shared a few words from your heart under a chuppah. And when it feels like it's not that you live or crave the recognition, you're kind of curious whether it landed, whether it was appreciated, whether it was valued. Rabbi Moskowitz and I were in New York this past Sunday for a wedding. I actually went to 2 weddings. It was so meaningful to me, and I'll shout out to both of those weddings. By the time I woke up the next morning, I had a voice note from each wedding saying, Noah was out of town, Noah was traveling, Noah was a Sunday away from your family, really meant a lot. Thank you so much. And that means the world. I hope you got that too, Rabbi Moskowitz. But it means
I did, don't worry.
Okay. But it means
and how long
did
that take? How long did that take?
Yeah.
So I actually want to say, as a spiritual practice, I recommend this a lot to professionals. If you keep heart thank you notes, actual notes, and you keep whatever it is, like your address book or the shul address book, and stamps right near you, and just in the morning you say, my spiritual practice is to time 5 minutes. Whose day can you make in 5 minutes? Not because they expected to hear from you, but dafka because they did not expect to hear from you. Who could you call today who's not expecting you, and you somehow made their day? We're not going to make this world better unless we do big things and many small things. So I appreciate the that sort of sense. I like to share just a practice that I have in davening. So before Modim, I actually stop, and it's like my gratitude journal is, if you daven 3 times a day, so I get to say it 3 times a day, is to just say the 3 things that I'm grateful for right now in this moment. And even if I repeated from the day before, just in this moment. And I think it changes. It's not only to change someone else's life, it changes your life. It changes the way that you feel blessed, and able to find the good all the time.
It's amazing practice.
It's amazing. I want to ask a follow-up, because what you just shared was amazing and so empowering, and I hope people take it to heart and really work on that gratitude.
I mean, you'll tell me by the end of the week if you get some thank you notes. That's how we need big data. We need big data.
Rabbi, let's remember to send her a thank you note after this.
I already took care of it. Yeah.
But how do
Made a
we
note.
get people not just to share gratitude and to appreciate that you have to be nice and, values that are so basic yet have gotten lost in our world? To me, there's like another element to that, which is, and you touched upon it, which is that people shouldn't feel as consumers, but they should feel as stakeholders. And we use that term here at BRS often. That, if I'm part of a community, it's not just, oh, the rabbi came to my wedding, so, I'm an investor. I pay his dues. I pay his salary. So he came to the wedding. I should thank him because I'm a nice person. There's another element to that, which is that, no, you are a stakeholder in this community. The rabbi might be a leader or a principal or a provost, might lead an institution, but there are stakeholders in that institution. They're not just investors that they give the money and they check out. We need people who are invested, who view themselves as part and parcel of the shul, that their destiny is entangled in our destiny and that we're all in this together. So how do you cultivate that passion, that energy, that enthusiasm, and that sense of mission in people?
Yeah, it's a great question. And honestly, working in higher education, I ask myself that every day about our students. I worry about entitlement. I worry that many children have grown up with largesse, and and a sense of their privilege, and it's hard to remind them that they got here in some way. I do think a lot about Dayenu. A friend of mine, Professor Sal Schimmel, wrote a beautiful piece about Dayenu in a book on the power of gratitude from a psychological perspective. He said a lot of people don't like to say thanks because it means ultimately that I couldn't do this myself. And when you look at Dayenu breaks things down into its sort of, would it have been good had we not gotten the Torah, right? And we crossed the Yam, but we didn't get the Torah. I mean, that would have changed Judaism radically. We wouldn't be here. But that's not really the question to be asked. The question is, how does acknowledging each part of this help me appreciate all of the large and small miracles that constitute wherever I am at any particular moment? And I say that because I think part of the thank you note, I once did a great exercise. We just talked about the thank you note with a group of people. They had to write a thank you note for $1 million donation. And someone said, "Thank you very much for your very generous gift." I said, "You didn't actually write that, did you?" I said, because I could give $18 or $1 and I would get the same note. Where is the donor in there? Where is the person on the other end? What would it look like if you said, "I just want to note 3 things that were so profound in my interaction with you," or this way. Now, what am I doing? I'm breaking it up. And part of that is sometimes, like Rabbi, you did the same thing when you talked about going to a wedding, right? You said, the documents I have to sign and I have to travel and you broke it down. And anytime we're interacting with someone, we just break it down to say, why are you here right now? What got you here? Give me all the steps. In fact, someone who's since passed had a very difficult relationship with her son, never really expressed gratitude. And then he went off to college. And he left a note in soap on the mirror that said, "Thanks, Mom." Mm. And she broke down in tears. And I felt that she had deserved much more. Because if you think about what your parents give you, because what you do for your children, right? And then you say, if I could break this down into parts. And I think that's an education. That's an education. And we don't do a service to our children by hiding what we do for them. Now, you don't lord it over them, but sometimes we need to actually explain, here's what I did for you. I'm very conscious of this, in a teacher-student relationship, how much teachers do for students. And now actually academically, it's interesting. In my day, I don't know about your day, we had to pay 5 cents to copy a piece of paper, and then it was 10 cents, and you had to copy all the articles. You had to look everything up. If I don't provide one link for a student who could easily Google something, "Dr. Brown, I didn't hear from you. Dr. Brown, it's 10:30 at night. How come this?" Now, most of the students are wonderful, and they're grateful, and they're thoughtful. But sometimes that sort of behavior, which is, I'm entitled to every moment of your time, and I'm not honoring it. But maybe I did that to myself. I made myself available. So I think there's some kind of cultural issue that we have to overcome that has actually thrived and bloomed because of social media and because of connection that we can make to each other through technology, that has given us over access and under information. if they
AJ
can.
Jacobs, who we had on Behind the Bima, wrote a book about gratitude where he tracked everything that goes into your cup of coffee, from the farmer growing the bean to the packaging, and that the whole theme of that book is the breaking it down and to see those things. You mentioned there's no books on fellowship. Interestingly, Rabbi Sacks, in praising the Rebbe, said the greatness of the Rebbe is he didn't create followers, he created leaders.
Yeah.
So whether we want to be good or bad followers, maybe we don't want to be followers at all. Maybe everyone in their own right wants to be a leader. So what would you say to somebody, be they the yeshiva or seminary girl who got back from the year in Israel and they're pursuing their education or waiting to get married, and they're in this space where they don't realize that they don't have to just wait for something. They can express leadership. It could be the newlywed couple or the family that just moved to a new community. And somebody says, Dr. Brown, how do you define leadership? Tell me how to do it, how to be it. How can I be a leader? How do I express leadership? Where do you sign up? How do you practice? How do I download that? What is leadership in a very practical way? What would your advice be to somebody?
I have a clipboard right here for you. So I'm always happy to give someone a task. And I do think that people value what they put effort into. And if we don't ask anything, then we get nothing. And if we ask little things, sometimes that builds into much larger things. First of all, I just want to push back, if it's okay, Rabbi Goldberg, on waiting for marriage.
No, I'm not endorsing that. My point is, I think
I worry that sometimes our students are within our community, they see that as the ultimate goal, and then they get married, and then they go, oh, now what? I'm 21, and what they forgot to do was engage in the pattern of self-discovery that is very common to university students, right? That should be, you go to college to meet new people. You don't go to college to be with exactly the same people you were in high school and camp and seminary and yeshiva. You came here to also discover the giants in your field. You came here to meet professors. In my day, if you had a conversation with a professor, it was like, that was a great day. That could have also been me, I'll admit. Class nerd, I'll take that. But I think now it's almost like there's a world where people don't engage with people who aren't their age and not in their, and I see this in shul, the fragmentation of who is at your Shabbos table. Every time you invite people, think, who's 10 years older, who's 10 years younger, how do I bring them together? I have learned so much, and just to acknowledge Rabbi Moskowitz. So I grew up in, I raised my children for 6 years in Boston, and I lived in a neighborhood where most people were older than me, and those people gave me unbelievable advice because they were older than me. And Phil's parents, Mark and Debbie, were two of those people who were in our lives. And you watch how they thought about their career, how they balanced work and life, how they got involved in their communities. And when you're just talking to people who are exactly your age, you're not getting any of that. It's surround sound all the time. So again, in the Ani L'Dodi V'Dodi Li, this Elul of love, another project, I'd say, who am I going to invite for Shabbat who is not my age? I'm very happy to say that I have close friends who are in their 20s and close friends who are in their 80s. I love having them together in class. I enjoy when they speak to each other in class. And I think people who run communities who are leaders need to do more of that. I will say, I don't believe everyone can be a leader. I'm sorry. I'm not of that view. I think we tell that to too many people. And what that means is you can be a donor, or you can volunteer once and we're going to call you a leader, or we're going to put you in a leadership development program, but you're not actually going to do anything. I think there's also a difference between managers and leaders. I think managing well is really an art, right? Being in charge of everyday operations and logistics and getting things done and raising money and running meetings well. All of that is really important, and it's managerial. Leaders actually have a vision for change. They stretch people, they take people there. And you asked before, Rabbi, about Rabbi Sacks and having more leaders. I think Rabbi Sacks would have been very honored that so much of his Torah has been taught. I know he gave advice. I was just speaking to a young female scholar, who was also a student of his, who said, Rabbi Sacks said, stop teaching my Torah, start teaching your Torah. And I think there's a lot of wisdom in that, of course, teaching his Torah, but he really saw, how do you grow the next generation? And I do want to say, because you mentioned the Rebbe, I was just in the National Library in Israel. I loved it so much, I just went back the next day. And I was able to tour, to go with the archivist to see the beginning of Rabbi Sacks's archives, which are not yet opened. And I saw the letter that he wrote to the Lubavitcher Rebbe to ask if he should become the chief rabbi. And I have chills even talking about it. And as was the Rebbe's, I wouldn't say pattern, but I recently spoke to someone from Chabad about this. He very often would return a letter and he would make a notation on the same letter. So one person who wrote to him and talked a lot about himself, he was depressed, and I, he circled all the I's and he sent it back. And Rabbi Sacks has written about that in this letter. The Rebbe, when he says, should I lead, he switched the should and the I. So he said, he switched, so it was a statement, a declarative statement, and not a question. I think the humble ask questions, and then when the answer is yes, you need to do something different, and it requires sacrifice. And so for the people who complain, people complain and they're not kind to me, and that, you know what? That's true in all walks of life and in all businesses, right? And if you're doing this for the outcome, then be outcome driven, and don't worry about the people who aren't always with you or the people who are complaining. They're always going to be complainers. That's a profession for some people. I'm looking for, the coalition of the willing. And I want to share an insight from a book called Principle Centered Leadership by Stephen Covey. And Covey talks about the fact that negative people are attracted to positive people, almost like a battery, right? So their energy, it's almost like, I want to show you that you're wrong, that you're Pollyannish, you're too naive. And he said that very often we waste time talking to people who aren't going to change. They're going to do the same thing, even if you answered their questions. So spend time finding your allies, the positive allies who want to make things happen in the world, and find them, identify them, and start doing things. And you've seen during this war, I can't even tell you the chesed, the way in which people stepped up and volunteered. Not only volunteered, they started organizations, they started nonprofits. They had that energy, and we can't lose it, because the war is not over. And the war, we all have to be on the front lines of something. And so here in the diaspora, the least we could do is spread the love, spread the change, do kind things, create an altruistic society.
Well, I'm just also wondering, Doctor, you talk about leadership, the visions, and where we can go from here. You're training students, you're teaching students, that next generation. At one hand, our communities, where there's more learning going on than we've ever done before. The Daf Yomis are exploding, and everyone's studying Torah. Are there things that you would love to see or have a vision for what our communities could be doing better in the future?
Again, how long do you have?
Until Rosh Hashanah.
Yeah, I don't think we think big enough about change. I think we think about, again, replacement. We're going to replace, our children are going to replace us. They're going to have similar homes and similar cars. Financially, they're finding out that that's not really so easy right now. And I have great rahmanut for the material aspirations that people have that may not get fulfilled. But I remember speaking to a very significant donor. He's a household name. And I asked him about his philanthropic choices. And he said, if you come to me and tell me that you want to change 20 blocks in Harlem, I am in. But if you tell me we want another $1,000 or $10,000 for our campaign, that's not inspiring. That's not an idea. It's about money, right? It's, where are the big ideas? And I've taken this year to, in part, read about a lot of the leaders in Israel, biographies and autobiographies, and thinking about people who made huge ideological changes in order to save the country and move the country forward. It takes a lot if you're Menachem Begin. It takes a lot if you are David Ben-Gurion. I mean, these are people, for those of you who are interested, Dennis Ross and David Makovsky, a close friend, wrote a wonderful book, Be Strong and of Good Courage, about 4 prime ministers who really shifted their thinking shifted their ideology in order to save a country. So you're thinking about like, what are the big leadership decisions you have to make? And I want to tell you, when I interview people in searches, I will often ask them, what is your biggest challenge? Now, if a rabbi says to me, it's really hard for me to get a shaliach tzibur, someone to lead services, that is very different than when someone says, I have an ex-convict in my synagogue, and I just don't know how to create a welcoming environment because people don't want him there, right? So I want to know, what is the vision that you have, and how do you amplify it? And then amplify it, and also show in the granular details how this works. So I do not want to go to another shul whose mission statement is, we are a warm and friendly community, and when I walk in, not one person says hello. I don't know what you have in the billboard.
Yeah.
I know you guys do a fantastic job of that. So I always feel welcomed when I'm there. But I do think, and I think it's a lot of it has to do with Orthodox insularity. We are afraid of strangers. And then even when someone comes in who is really not a stranger, who we have so much in common with, we just talk to our friends. I call it like, there's an Orthodox facial expression. It's called the stare. Right? You walk in, someone looks at you, and if they know you, they smile. And if they don't look at you, they stop smiling. So I always promote Zingerman's, which is a non-kosher deli in Ann Arbor, does they do customer service training, and they have a rule. If you are within 10 feet of a person, of a customer, you have to look up and you have to look up and make eye contact. If you're within 4 feet, you have to say hello.
Right.
You want to give shiurim to friendliness? Give shiurim to friendliness. Like, say to people, if someone is on your board and they are not the ambassadors of your community, the ambassadors of love and friendliness in your community, this is not the job for them. Right? This is, don't go to your friends. I'm going to say one more thing. Can I say one more thing, Rabbi?
Sure.
I'm sorry, I'm talking too much. I'm so excited to see you. Sometimes I work with a group of rabbis before the Yamim Norim, before the high holidays. And I had the privilege of doing this many, many years ago in Georgia, a group in Atlanta. We worked on sermons, and I asked them to do an al-chet for themselves, right? 2 for themselves as rabbis, right? For the sin of something that you feel comfortable talking about. 1 you can keep to yourself, and 1 for your congregation. It was fascinating for me. So one of the rabbis wrote, for the sin of davening, that no one dies on my day off. And I thought this was really funny, but everybody else said I should have written that, because they were negotiating that border between personal and communal time. And one person wrote, and I cannot even tell you how profoundly this has influenced me, for the sin of gravitating to congregants I like when I'm the rabbi of this entire congregation. If you take a leadership role and you are only gravitating to people you know and you like, you are not leading. You are socializing.
That's a great point. I want to shift gears for a second. I mean, it's all amazing. And every topic we've spoken about, you could speak much longer and we would learn much more. But I want to shift gears. You wrote an article several years ago. I don't remember how long ago. I remember it left an impact on me because Boca Raton Synagogue, part of our growth was strategically our very robust scholar in residence program, speaker series. We continue to do it, and it's incredible. Our community is exposed to an enormous, diverse array. One of the pages we're most proud of in our weekly bulletin or brochure is that list and the pictures of who came just in the past year, which on the one hand we're proud of, on the other hand puts enormous pressure for each year. How are you going to match it, let alone surpass it? And correct me if I'm wrong. I remember the thesis being, or it was a challenge to the community, is that the best use of money? Scholars and residents today are charging significant, and where else could that money be applied and allocated? What difference could it make? So a person comes in for a hit and run, a drive-by, they came in for a weekend, they come in for a night, and they teach. Is that the best use of money? Has your thinking changed on that? You yourself are part of that, I won't say tour or program, because you have so much to offer, and we take advantage of it. So this is not a cynical conversation whatsoever. And no matter how you answer it, we still want you to come, and we'll continue to schedule and pursue you to come. But just, I think in the bigger picture, it's such an interesting question because it's one of those things that happens, and it happens automatically. And it happens without thinking, and people compete. And Rabbi Moskowitz for years put together the most incredible brochure, and rabbis would come in and say, "You're ruining my life." My president walked into my office, put down the BRS brochure that Rabbi Moskowitz put together, wants to know why we don't have that and why we don't do that. But do we ever take that step back and evaluate what's the return on investment on this?
Yeah, so I wrote that many years ago. I don't know how many, and I interviewed people who were on the circuit, Orthodox, Reform, Conservative. I was very interested, if there were differences, and I wrote it as an educator. Right? What was the educational value? Mostly because I was questioning my own educational value. When I go away, my idea of teaching is not a single event. My idea of being involved in a deep relationship with people is not answering a question when I don't know your name. And I don't know anything about you. Certainly, I don't believe that adult education happens in a vacuum. I don't believe any education happens in a vacuum. It happens in a context. And what I was really struggling with, Rabbi, is whether or not this sort of celebrity teaching was taking people away from learning every day and learning from people who were regular mechanchim, mechanchot, regular educators. I think you're right that it puts pressure on synagogues that don't have that budget. I didn't grow up in a synagogue that had scholars in residence. In fact, I remember only one synagogue I knew, even in my adult life till I was in my 30s, where they had one memorial lecture a year. And now it's like the Olympics, right? It's Hollywood Weekly. And I do question the value. I will say I have not shifted my thinking on this in terms of people really committing to regular shiurim and say, in the spirit of tshuva and elul, what is a regular shiur? I for more than 15 years, I gave a once weekly shiur in my shul. So I wasn't being hypocritical. I do fewer scholars in residence. In fact, for the past many years, I only do usually one or two a year. I actually was a scholar in resident in a synagogue. And I would say, I think that's a better solution, is to bring someone in who comes in multiple times. And people, this is an amazing thing. I've been teaching for 36 years. I have folders and folders and folders of classes. And someone said, I heard someone say this. I heard her once already. She was here 10 years ago, right? I was like, oh, okay. Because that's their idea of education is, how are you inspiring me at this moment in time, as opposed to you have to do the work. And that in terms of the stakeholder versus consumer, if you keep bringing scholars in residence, people don't do the work of learning. They do the work of sitting passively. And you know what it's like? If you want to know how you did, you go to the bathroom after you speak and you just stay in a stall and listen, right? You just pay attention, right? And you'll hear that people, they're like, oh, fabulous. You know what? I hated that point she made. Or when I get down, often I'll have this experience. The first thing someone says to me is, here's what you didn't say. Right? So it's given me a lot of pause. The only thing I will say that has changed is I think there have never been a lot of women who have been speaking. And I think now there, in certain ways, there are more, and in certain communities there are fewer. There's been a backlash, and it's made me sad. I think in part when someone says, my daughter heard you speak, and she's never heard a woman speak or a woman teach Torah in that way, that actually has given me pause. But otherwise, everything still stands.
Something else, I mean, it does connect a little bit with what you were saying earlier about in the college years being exposed to the giants of your field or seeing big people and great people. So agreed, in the ongoing, it can't take the place of ongoing learning and an ongoing teacher and that relationship. But there is that value of just being exposed to big people and big thinkers and big ideas.
Exposure and passivity go together. So thinking about how you could make the relationship a little bit different. We're not interrogating. What we're doing is, there's a fad to do this. It wasn't always this way. I don't think it will always be this way. And I think we have to interrogate educational fads and say, what is good about this that we should continue? What should we discontinue? And what should we modify? And so that's something I think, I think it's worth thinking about. I mean, it's different in a large synagogue when you have financial resources and human resources, and you can provide all of that. But for a synagogue that has very little, I'd say, spend it on your teen programming rather than spend it on an expensive guest.
I will say, just to add another layer, and in defense of our adult education program here, but one component for a shul our size, obviously we have 1,000 members, enormous amount of diversity, is we view our scholar in residence program almost as a reflection of our values also. In other words, there is an educational component to who we bring in and why we bring people in, because part of that is educating our community of what are our values and who do we align ourselves with and who are our leaders and who are
Yeah,
our role models. And
yes.
there's a definite educational component to
Yeah.
that when we bring people in and who we don't bring in.
Right. No, and I admire that, and I think it's really important. But there's also there's a political aspect to this also, if you don't mind my saying, which is we're diverse within a very limited, narrow focus. We uh, you know we pick and select on the values front, so we don't always hit the diversity mark. We're willing to have X, but not Y, and I understand that that is what we that is what we do in terms of promoting one thinker over another. But again, in the social media, people are looking for what's that one great line. That's not what I do in education. I'm not here for your soundbite. If you want to sit down and open a Tanakh with me and read with me, like, let's do that. I really want to do that. I want to do that slowly with you. I don't want to do that in a fast way. And also, I don't want to say something which, thank goodness it's Shabbat and people can't record. But if I respond to a question and then someone takes it out of context, I'm toast, right? And I think there are risks to that.
It's not only scholar in residence, it's also even in person. Because as you were speaking, I'm thinking about, I have learning groups which are smaller, interactive. I know everybody, they ask questions, there's a back and forth. And then let's say my Parsha Shir, where, Baruch Hashem, there's very nice attendance from beyond just our local community. And I meet people all the time, like my grandparents go to you. I'm like, oh, they're amazing. You don't necessarily, it's hard to sometimes connect the face and the name. And I don't want interaction because I'm also, recording it or streaming it or posting it, and then it's not play. So,
Right, so I only want interaction. I'm not there to lecture anybody. And people have said to me, it's so annoying when you let other people speak. Right. And that tells me a lot about the way in which they perceive their own learning, again, on the passivity front.
Would you recommend getting someone that doesn't share your values to be a teacher or a speaker, so that let's just use our shul as an example. There's someone that we don't necessarily agree with their views, but as an educator, is it important to for them to be able to share it? And you could say you don't agree with it, but for us to hear the other side.
I always think that it's important to hear the other side, because I think it helps you sharpen your own position and, again, interrogate your own assumptions. I think we need to do that politically. I think we need to do that religiously. How many Orthodox shuls have had someone Haredi come and speak, right, and give that person a platform? What about having someone who politically doesn't think like you? And that goes, like, oh, we do that for the right, but we wouldn't do that for left. It's too threatening. But I understand, unfortunately today, again, because of social media, someone complains about it and they make an association. Oh, if you had such and such person as a speaker, that means that is who you are. And I can't believe that you would say this, that you would do this. And I think that's problematic.
Can I ask you a personal question? I'm always inspired and
That
impressed.
depends.
Yeah, I guess that was the introduction. But when I see members of a family who all are expressing leadership, or several members or siblings, so we have the privilege of also knowing your brother, the Rosh Yeshiva, Rabbi Schoonmaker, and you. Can you share in your childhood, in your family? Rabbi Sacks is obviously one role model. You spoke about him. Was there something around your Shabbos table? Is there someone in your family? I don't know your whole family, but we have hosted your brother also in our community. That siblings, or that both of you have emerged leaders and caring about the Jewish people in different ways, but who are?
We're three siblings. We grew up for the most part in Deal, New Jersey, and we grew up. Our mother is a Holocaust survivor, child survivor, and our grandparents were survivors. And I would say that was a very, very large part of our Jewishness. We did not grow up observant. I became observant through NCSY as a preteen, and then went to Jewish school for the first time as a junior. I went to Frisch, but I went to a fancy prep school for the first 2 years, where I learned how to do ballroom dancing, and I wore uniforms, and I had an incredible education there. And I had a lot of catching up to do. My brother started earlier. He's my younger brother, although he's many inches taller than I am, feet taller than I am. So he had maybe a little less catching up to do. It's hard to catch up. You have to really love something. When you think about what it means, and I know that in your shul you invest a lot in this. Thank God we're able to. Modern Orthodoxy has attracted many, many, many adherents. And there are people in our shuls who really never learned how to daven. And I can tell you, when you don't know Hebrew, how hard it is to learn how to daven. Right? It's just like you struggle. There's a choreography. Everybody knows what's going on. You don't know what's going on. And so I always have a lot of rachmanut when people come into shul and they don't exactly know what page they're on. And you could just, again, you could be in your bubble. And I wish more shuls had the equivalent of a beginner's sort of minyan, so that people could, even people who are deeply on that. I think ideas were important in our home. I will say growing up in not far from the beach was also, the relationship you have to nature is very different. And I think the attachment, the spirituality that comes through nature for me is very, very profound. I spend a lot of time alone, thinking about, at the end of my road, thinking about my smallness in relation to a great, great ocean of humanity, which was much larger than myself. So I don't know.
We have a great explanatory service Rabbi Broide leads, but we have in our main shul, we have a page turner that has the number. Just to give you the orientation, the other day, a Hasidic visitor said to me, he pointed, he said, is that the Nate's Shkia, like what Zman is that announcing? I said, it's actually announcing the page. And you would think, and we can even be defensive because we're very mainstream. Why do we have that? And you'd be surprised, or maybe you wouldn't based on what you just described. It's not just the unaffiliated, uninitiated, or the one who doesn't have the education who's so grateful. I can't tell you how many people who have a Jewish education, people who are young people who are right now getting their Jewish education, who say, thank you, that's helpful. That helps me navigate and figure out what page. And so it's not only for the person with the little background.
Yeah, no, and we're still recovering from COVID, right? How many people were out of shul, still are not coming back to shul, missed critical parts of their education because they weren't in shul. And again, like when you're thinking about real leadership, you're not thinking about everybody who's in. Your job, if you're the shepherd, you're always looking at the straggler. You're always looking at the outlier, and trying to keep the outlier, satisfy the needs of the outlier, and keep the outlier in the flock. And I just don't think we do that enough. And I worry that we do that less and less, particularly as we become stratified economically in synagogues. I think that danger is greater. I think families are composed differently. We have much more divorce. We have infertility in ways, and I'm not convinced that we're sufficiently sensitive about the changing Jewish family. And that also adds to, you're going to lead. Who are you going to lead, and how are you going to lead them, and who you're going to remember, and who is invisible. And I think that about the war too.
We're so grateful for your time and letting us go behind the bima. Maybe you can close us out by sharing with us, what are you working on now? I know you're a prolific writer, and we're grateful for those contributions. What are you working on now? What are you writing about?
Well, so thank you for asking. I would say two things have been, in the writing community, have been very hard for me. Last year, we did a beautiful volume through Palgrave Macmillan on an ode to joy, happiness, and the thinking of Rabbi Sacks and beyond. And we had about 45 contributors, and it came out right before October 7th. And it wasn't a time we could talk about joy. So it was very hard to put that book out, which I did with our assistant director at the Sacks-Herenstein Center, Dr. Cheryl Weiss. And we wanted to come out as an institution honoring Rabbi Sacks and his approach to happiness. And I'll just share one little dot from that. His daughter Gila, Tal Ben Shachar did the forward, as did his daughter Gila. And Gila said, happiness was very hard. It was very important to my father because it did not come easy to him. He worked at it. And then I did a book in the Kohelet Tanakh series on Kohelet, which also came out really right before October 7th. So I think part of it is looking at things that, and Kohelet has so much to say about the current climate, but I think that was hard for me. That in fact, I put out Esther right before COVID. I mean, it came out in February and then it was COVID. So I feel that's been a little hard. Right now, I'm working on a book that will come out hopefully digitally through Koren, hopefully around October 7th, on the war. Right now, it's called The Morning After Faith Post October 7th. Reflections on a year of doing this, and a year of really feeling myself and fielding questions about how you maintain faith after what happened and during this current war. So that's what I'm working on right now.
Can you take us behind the Bima? How do you choose topics? How do you, all of us write here, some more than others, but there's writer's block, there's that pressure to produce. So how do you get past that? And how do you decide what topic you want to write about that's going to speak to the most number of people?
Right. So very often, when I'm writing a Tanakh, I fall in love with the book, and then I just want to be in that book. And then I'm immersed in that book usually for many, many years. Before and during the writing process and after the writing process. But otherwise, I'm paying attention to what hurts people, what they're struggling with. And I pay attention to that, or what's of my intellectual interest in the moment. I learned so many things from Rabbi Sacks. Rabbi Sacks was a voracious reader who read outside of his discipline. In fact, I couldn't say his discipline. He read demography and sociology and psychology. He loved self-help books, and he talks about his love for self-help books. So he read very broadly, and I think reading broadly helps you say, "Oh, geez, what am I curious about today?" But I do think when people want to write, they need to have a writing discipline, and it's not important. It's not important what you write. What's important is how you edit. And so write quickly, edit slowly, and then and then generally you tend to put out a better product at the end of the day. I would say when you can start with people, someone asks you an interesting question, you read something about someone, that story really is what people want to hear an idea, but they want to hear ideas often through stories.
Dr. Erica Brown, thank you so much for your time. Again, in this conversation, just like with your visits, and this is coming from the highest form of praise, so I hope it's received that way. You're a great intellectual, and you write brilliantly, but it's your message of humanity, of love and care and concern for the small things, which is so powerful. And therefore, this conversation in this time of year is so perfect. And I hope that I and we and everyone who listens will accept these challenges to be better and bigger in these ways. Grow intellectually, but also grow in the way we care for one another. So thank you for going behind the Bima and spending some time with us today.
It's all about love in the small things.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Catch us next time for another peek behind the Bima.